how do you deal with horses who do find this stuff really challenging, when you have to keep doing the rehab, you can't stop, but you equally have a horse who's getting more and more upset?
We have to help our horses' bodies help themselves as much as we possibly can.
This episode is kindly sponsored by Premier Performance and Toggy.
Happy Wednesday! We're back for episode 8? 7. Ooh, 7 weeks.
I didn't speak over you.
How
are you?
I'm good, but I always start. So how was your week, Miri? And more importantly, how is Duchess?
Duchess is good. Oh, one of the chickens is trying to exit the garden via the hedge. Not joking. I can see the chicken outside. I wish I could show this on the podcast. There is 1, 2, 3 chickens, one up high, one medium, and one right down on the floor. What are you doing? They're chicken running.
They are chicken running.
Here I am recording the podcast, and here we have the chickens out my dirty window doing something really random. Where's that one off to? Look, she's right up there. Anyway, how am I? I'm good. I've changed it. I'm not a houseplant. I'm a rechargeable battery.
You've really
and I didn't
realise.
Yeah, I've really thought about this, because when the sun comes out, I feel like a completely different person, and it's a bit problematic. And you said this today, didn't you, when we were chatting? You were like, yeah, it's hard, isn't it, living in a country where sometimes the sun doesn't shine for literally months on end, and you feel like a soggy piece of cardboard, you know, like the bit of cardboard that like gets left outside and next to the bin, and it's all like wet and flat and rubbish. That's me most of the time. And then the sun comes out and I'm suddenly a brand new cardboard box. That was a weird analogy, but genuinely the sun comes out and I feel like a completely different person, and I no doubt lots of people will be feeling like that, and even to the point of like I can get up better in the mornings because it's lighter. And I think for equestrians this is a really big shift, and I just want you all to be careful with this shift. This can suddenly feel like somebody has filled the tank of gas and you've got to burn the fuel straight away and like run with it. And actually, what I think is really important is sometimes around the time of the spring equinox, which is the end of March, from here to there, can feel like this real ramping up of energy. And it's good to just notice it, but just let it like simmer out, not like off we go 100 miles an hour, because you'll find that you might run out of energy a bit quickly. You know, it's still cold. The earth is still kind of getting going again. I'm being a bit Mother Nature-y with my hand movements right now, but just let it flow naturally. So yes, I've been noticing a shift in that since the weather has started to change. Duchess is great. She's again making loads more progress. We're now picking at her feet, which sounds like really basic, but actually picking out a horse's feet when they are really in flight mode is impossible for them, because a horse's flight mode is incredibly important to them. They are flight animals. So by lifting one foot off the ground, they essentially are handing over that responsibility to you, and handing over that kind of, they have to feel very safe to pick up their feet. So if ever you're having trouble with your horse and you can't pick up their feet, I would be looking at how regulated they are in their whole nervous system as to maybe why that is not happening. And what else? I've discovered the only exciting thing I've got to tell you is that I have got a spider that lives on my microphone, and it's been there for a few days, and he's very sweet. I named it when I was recording my Patreon podcast, and I'm not going to do anything about it.
How big are we talking?
Oh, very small. Let me see.
Oh, okay, like a money spider.
Can you see?
I'm just looking. Okay, so he's like the size of one of your, the size of your pinky finger thumbnail, maybe.
Yeah, he's got little thingies.
Pincers.
Anyway, this isn't very exciting podcast information, is it? But I've got a spider that lives on my microphone. How's your week?
My week's been good. So last week I spoke about taking Harley out for the first time on my own.
Choking on my cup of tea. Yeah.
And it was really fun. I was so proud of myself. So my partner came with me, which was really nice, because he said for ages that he wants to come out and see us and see what we do, like off the yard. Harley just loaded straight away, super confident, travelled really well, arrived and was just amazing. Like, he like whinnied at a horse and I thought, oh, maybe he's like a bit anxious. But then as soon as I went to tack him up, he was just like quiet as a lamb. he went in the indoor. My plan was to go in the indoor, do the same warm-up we do at home, and then maybe take him in their outdoor arena, because they were very kind and said we could do both. He was incredible. I mean, the videos, there's some on my Instagram, but of him in the indoor, he just felt completely different to last year. Like, he just felt incredible and confident, and it was so wonderful. We had a little bit of a moment when we transitioned to the outdoor arena. Which
is interesting.
Yes,
maybe we should talk about what we spoke about, because I do think that could be really helpful for people, actually. So go on, tell us about your experience from 1 to 2, and then we'll talk about what we discussed.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with my coach too, and we sort of landed on a conclusion that was helped by our conversation. So I hate to create stories around horses' behaviour, because it can not always be helpful, but there have been more than 3 occasions, I would say, where Harley has moved from one arena to another and found that second arena quite difficult. And what I mean by quite difficult is he will not want to move forward. He is quite spooky. He will sometimes stand up and do these little rears that are not super high, but are very much like, I really don't want to do this. I'm not comfortable, blah, blah, blah. And you can always get him going, but he never quite comes down again in that space. He's always a little bit tense, and like it's challenging. So he did that in this arena, and we had a conversation about it, Miri and I, about how I could try and help him get comfortable in that new space. And you had some thoughts, so you share what you said.
So what I noticed, I didn't see the whole video. So again, social media is a magical place, isn't it? Because you just see this little snapshot. And what I noticed was that you were quite quick to ask him to just travel forwards in that moment. And that is quite a common thing, isn't it? We're like, having a problem, just go forwards. The energy doesn't feel good, let's move forwards. And I said early on in one of our early podcasts that horses are energy, and we just need to find a way to move that energy. But often we just think, go straight line. And what I said to Rhi was, in that moment, if you feel that energy, first of all, just slow down in yourself and, acknowledge the moment to say, I understand, Harley, that you're having a really hard time. We've just moved from one place to another. I am giving you a safe space to be in. And then from there, when you've just paused and just let your heart rate come back down, let his heart rate maybe come back down, or if he then started to move his feet in a way that wasn't positive, like he was directing the energy and he was starting to do something regardless of you adding any energy yourself. So you were literally just sat on board and he started shimmying about. That would be a moment where you would then direct the energy. So Rhi practices the groundwork that I coach, and we've had some lessons, and she has one of my groundwork halters available via my website, in stock at the moment, little plug. And so my suggestion was you would take what we call turning hind legs. So where you ask them for inside bend, you apply your inside leg or your inside hand, depending on whether you're on the ground or on board, and you move the energy in a curving way through their body to remind them, A, of the relaxation that they have learnt from the ground, but B, to give space for that energy to move through their body. So that was my take on the situation. Did Hannah sort of align with that? Was that what she came back with?
Yeah, so in my weekly lessons, I often start as I'm warming up, explaining how the week's been, or a problem that I'm having, or a thing that I want to discuss. And so I brought this up, and we were talking about Harley. And Harley is a pure Irish draft, and I think people who've never had Irish drafts sometimes think that Irish drafts are these big, lumpy, easy horses, slow horses. And actually a lot of people who own drafts will talk about how they're actually quite sensitive and they can get quite anxious. And he is, I mean, every horse is different, but he does have he's a little worrier occasionally, and so it's easy for him to get overwhelmed and anxious if he's in the wrong place. And the other thing that my coach talks about with Irish drafts, which is so true of Harley, is that sometimes they just need a moment for their brains to catch up with their bodies. Mm-hmm. And so what we've done before is given him a chance to just stand still and just take in whatever it is that we need him to take in. And then actually out hacking, if he spooks at something or he doesn't want to go past something, often all it takes is 30 seconds or 20 seconds of just standing still. He takes it in, he's like, cool, I've got this. And so what we're going to try, and with the same energy that you said, which is like, we're not just trying to shove the energy forward. I'm taking him out to a local competition next Saturday or Sunday. I was originally going to do the prelim and the intro. I've knocked the prelim out because that would add pressure to me. And instead, we've made it really, really easy in the test. And we're just going to try this new technique when we move from the warm-up to the outdoor, where we're doing the test, where we just stand there in the test before, let him take it in, and we'll see. And if we walk in there and he has the same reaction, or he finds that really difficult, well, I know that it doesn't work, and that's okay. We try something different. But then I think like the groundwork.
You could then just take turning hind leg, move his body a little bit, and encourage him to say, look, you can go this way. I'm doing like a swaying motion backwards and forwards. And there was something that you said just then. We don't want to just try and push the energy out the front. And I often use the metaphor it's a bit like trying to put toothpaste on your toothbrush with the lid on. You've got to let the lid off. You've got to open something, and often it's the shoulders. Horses, when they get into flight mode, everything constricts, and they pull their shoulder blades in. And what they're doing is they're protecting their venous systems, the blood in their neck, from predators. So they're like shrinking everything in. They're ready to exit whenever they need to. And so we have to then reopen that. This will be a clip for Instagram, me dancing. They have to open that, and then the energy can start to shift again. And so in the groundwork that we practice, it's so much about not just creating bend, but opening the outside of the body. So I love this plan. You're going to go, you're going to stop, breathe, connect, and then you ask the energy forward. If the energy goes, you go, okay, now we bend. And we move the shoulders, and then we go forward again. And if you end up in the test with those moments, thankfully you're not at the Olympics, so you could kind of throw away a mark or two, make the shape in the body, create it, and off you go again.
Well, that is the other thing we talked about, actually, is he had a spook or something. I think there was some water dripping off the barn outside the arena, and that was freaking him out. And so Hannah, the other thing she said, which I think is just super helpful, it's so basic, but it's super helpful, is if it's happening in the canter, take it down to trot. If it's happening in the trot, take it down to walk. If it's happening in the walk, just stop. Like, just take the difficulty away.
And take maybe even like with the walk, I would say bring it down to walk, but stop trying to do the thing and go back to move your body in a positive way. And that's a really good point, actually, and one that will help people out a lot. A horse's eyes work in a really interesting way. So they have something in their eyes. Don't know what it's called. Don't ask me. Not a vet, but I know how it works. So they have something in their eye. I'm holding my hand up with my fingers spread wide in front of my eyeball. They have something in their eyes that work like a picket fence, because they don't have they don't own sunglasses. So they have this thing in their eye that protects, I think it's protecting their retina. But what it means is things pass by this thing. So when they're walking past something scary, or if to put it this way, if a dog was walking past a picket fence, you could see that it was a dog, right? You'd be like, oh, look, a Labrador walking past the picket fence. If that Labrador was to run past the picket fence, you could, if you were a nervous type or you were feeling a bit dysregulated, you might think that was a wolf. So when you're walking, I can see the plastic bag. There's a bag. Okay, I can cope with it. Trotting past, I can see the plastic bag. Okay, I'm not really coping with it very well. Cantering. Oh, shit.
Yes, that's such a good way of putting it.
Right, and so when we slow it all down, we give the horse the opportunity to process it, and again, we get the chance to move the energy in the way that they need us to, rather than feeling like we've just got to get on with it, because there is no such thing as just getting on with it with a horse in my book. So that's really interesting. I'm in some ways glad you had that experience at this point, because that's going to help you shape the whole rest of your competition experiences for the next few months. So keep us updated. Great. Can't wait to hear about the rest of the times you're doing stuff.
I'm excited, and I'm very proud of him, very proud of us, so it's all good.
Yeah,
and it's fun.
That's great. It's great that it's fun, and it's great that despite it maybe having difficult moments, that it's still it's so much about the process, right? And the progress 100%. Of the process.
Yeah, 100%.
Amazing. So we're going to talk about something a bit interesting today. Well, it's always interesting, isn't it? Because we're such interesting people. But we're going to talk about like injuries and rehab and maybe injury prevention. And it's that kind of time of year where I'm hearing a lot of people having difficult times with horses, coming out of winter, coming into spring, like I was talking about, that energy shift. So unfortunately, Rhi and I have had our fair share of injury experience, and so we wanted to touch on that. This is going to be a multiple part series on this topic. We're going to have a vet come on at some point, maybe a physio, just to give you guys a really broad insight into this. Obviously, like I said, we both have a fair amount of experience, and I do offer rehabilitation livery, so I've got a fair amount to say. I'll try and shut up a bit, but we're going to just start with some of our experiences with injuries and go from there, really. Rhi, do you want to
Before we dive in? Well, yeah, I wanted to give a little trigger warning because we are going to talk about, my experience of injury and rehab was resulted in the loss of my horse. And that is a difficult topic to talk about, especially if you're someone who's currently going through injury and rehab. And I really feel like Miri and I can give you a hopeful end or parts to this podcast. But I also just want to say, like, it's okay if you're not there and you don't want to listen to that difficult part, because that is triggering. I would struggle to hear that too. So, it's okay if you want to switch off and see us next week as well.
But also what we will do is in the show notes, we will put the chapters in the show notes. Yes. And what that will allow you to do is, if this next part of the conversation where we share our experiences is really difficult, then you will be able to skip forward to the part where we talk about what you can be doing, because I do wholeheartedly believe that it's pretty rare that we have to kind of end the rehab journey these days. There's so much that we can do, and there may be things that haven't been tried, and so there will be hope, we promise. So yes, we will give you the timestamps for that so that you can skip the hard bit and get to the hopeful part.
Yeah.
You had a really, really hard time, didn't you, Rhi? And you very sadly lost a horse because of injury. Do you want to start by telling us a bit about that and what went on?
Yes, so my first horse, Woody, who I bought when I was 28, such an exciting moment. He was an Irish sport horse, and about 4 months after he came home, I talked about how I did a 5-stage vetting, but I didn't do an x-ray, and I would have found side bone if I'd x-rayed, and arthritis in his hocks as well. So about 4 months after he came home, he'd had a couple of abscesses, which was fine, and if you know how an abscess appears, it looks like the horse is like hopping lame on one leg, and unfortunately
3 legs.
Horses who 3 legs, sorry, not one leg. God, that'd be insane.
Is it? And then they're very lame on one of the legs. Yes,
very lame on one leg. And unfortunately, when a horse appears like that, it is either something very, very serious or an abscess usually. And so Woody had a couple of abscesses, and I went to get him in from the field one day, and he was hopping lame. And I actually stood in the field with him and cried, because I was like, it just didn't feel right. And we got the vet out, and what had happened in the field is that Woody had, I think it would probably have been the equivalent of turning your ankle. That's how I think about it. He did something that meant that the side bone, one of his side bone, cracked at the base, but it was such a violent crack that it cracked all the way through the side bone and then all the way through the pedal bone as well. Horrific fracture.
Side bone is a hardening of a soft cartilage area of the side of the horse's hoof capsule. So it's all their feet, no hoof, no horse, as they say, and these parts are all very, very interlinked. So yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so super complicated kind of structure in the hooves, and there was other stuff going on in his hooves as well that we realised later. But so typically with pedal bone fractures, actually, it's not totally uncommon, and usually it's like 3 months of box rest with some hand walking, and then you start to work what's called from the box, which means the horse remains on box rest for like the majority of the day and night, but you do hand walking or whatever from the box. I remember the first time I went down to Lip Hook and we did our first MRI, one of the most senior surgeons there was like, my vet had been very positive, and this senior surgeon was like, I really think you need to manage your expectations here. I would be very surprised if this horse came back into full work. And that was at the very beginning. And so I was you're already then sat with two professionals who have very different opinions on the outcome. And that is hard as an owner if you've never been through this before. But at least we had the information, like we got our plan, we knew what we were doing. So we did our 3 months, and unfortunately Woody hadn't improved at all. And so 3 months turned into 6 months, and 6 months turned into 9 months. And throughout this all, we were doing hand walking, I was going up twice a day, I was grooming him, we were trying out different things. Like for a period he turned out in a pen, and then he couldn't do that anymore, and then he could do it again. Like it all went up and down. I won't bore you with it. We did loads of x-rays, loads of MRIs. And actually in December, and I think this is probably what makes it so cruel, in December I actually got back on him for the first time, and we started walking. And my coach, or my vet, sorry, had said to me, if at some point during this walking he goes lame again, you don't have a ridden horse. Like if he can't cope with walking under saddle, he is not a ridden horse. And we always knew that would happen. That was a sort of possibility. And I'd already at this point taken jumping out of the mix. I knew he wasn't going to jump. I knew he probably wasn't going to do dressage again. It was maybe just hacking. And a few weeks into our walking, he went lame on his other 4. And so we were like, okay, it's fine. No riding for Woody. And Woody was 10 at this point. So, I'd already kind of made my peace with retiring him, and I was okay with that. So the next step was then we retire Woody, and what I needed to do to get him to retirement was he was wearing shoes on all 4 feet, and he was also wearing I don't know what they're called, Miri, pads. He was wearing pads in his hooves, so a lot of stuff. And we needed to get him to a place where he could turn out sound. So we were trying to work towards that. So anyway, in March, and I will be forever grateful that my coach did this, I hadn't been seeing Woody turn out in the indoor arena. He'd been going out for about half an hour a day with a pony to just see how he coped in a kind of a turnout environment. And I hadn't been seeing because it was right in the middle of the day when I was at work. And my coach pulled me aside one weekend, and she was like, I think we need to talk about what's next. And she was like, over the last few days, Woody's been getting worse and worse when he's going out in the indoor school. And so we got to the point where he was lame, even going in there with shoes on, like very lame. And so she talked me through kind of the sort of possibilities, and we talked about end of life. And because she's incredible, I asked her to explain exactly what happens and what that looks like and all the things, and she did. And then that weekend we got the vet out to do a lameness workup where you see them on various surfaces and they can do a proper assessment. And Woody was so lame. I hadn't seen him trot or canter in months because we were just walking, and it completely broke my heart. Like, it was awful. It was awful. And so I remember standing with my coach and my vet, and my vet basically said, look, your options are that you do another 6 months of box rest, and then at the end of that you may have a horse that might be sound, but I doubt it. And she said the other decision is that we end this for him now. And I think the worst bit is it like wasn't even a hesitation, because sorry,
it's okay.
I felt so strongly in my gut that day that I couldn't ask him to do any more for me. My poor horse, who had stood in a box for almost a year, and with the prospect of him staying in the box for another 6 months just so I could see him every day, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. It wasn't fair, and horses don't think like humans. They don't realise that something's coming. They can only exist in the day-to-day, and I just couldn't do it. So, yeah, we chose to have him, well, I chose to have him put to sleep a few days later, and that was hard too, because you have a date in the diary. No one talks about that and how awful that is. you have this day where you're going to choose to end an animal's life. Like, I've never had that responsibility in my life before. And knowing that it's coming is awful. You just feel like the worst person. You feel so guilty when you see them. But then you feel guilty for staying away, like you just don't know what to do. And my coach was incredible. She called my insurance company to let them know what was happening, because you have to do that if you're going to make these decisions. And she called the transport and she sorted everything out so that I wouldn't have to talk to these people. She was so good, and I stayed with him until the very, very end. And that was hard too. And yeah, I mean, I'll be so grateful for my coach, because she was like, are you sure you want to stay? And I was like, 100%. And in the moment where they go down, that's really difficult to watch, obviously. But I didn't want to leave, and my coach, she didn't tell me, but she just like scooped me up in a hug so I couldn't see.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty awful, and like, you know, we're like 2 years on now, and I still find it so heartbreaking. And yeah, I stayed away from horses for months after that, and I just, you know, my partner was incredible, and I got really into like swimming and the gym because I needed something else. And then, you know, I didn't think I'd ever get another one, and then, you know, I think it was like 7 or 8 months later that I sort of found Harley and decided that I'd sort of give it a go. But yeah, oh, it was so rough, like the whole year and then the end.
Such a, you know, for someone who had wanted a horse all their life, had been a pony mad child, dreamed of it, and then this was your first experience. You know, I think what a cruel universe we live in sometimes in these circumstances. Like, that is really brutal and very, I'm just so sorry that you went through that and that was your experience. And I guess, you know, pouring your heart out, thank you. You will have helped a lot of people by talking so candidly about your experience, because nobody talks about this. And this is the hardest thing that we do with having horses. And it makes me emotional because I've been fortunate to have had horses very old. I've ended up having very old horses and having to have been able to give them that fair end. But no, you know, it's kind of a taboo topic and it's very hard to discuss. And I think it's a very important thing, because when we, you know, like we were talking about in our podcast last week, you know, having that responsibility is really enormous. They, you know, in the wild, horses die of their overgrown teeth. You know, that's generally why they keel over in the end, is because they can't eat, and then they would get, you know, older and thinner and that kind of thing, and it would be like a natural ending in that respect. But when we have horses and we keep them in this manufactured way, we have to be the one to be brave and take that responsibility when the time comes. And, you know, I think there is a fate worse than death. And wow, this topic of conversation has got off onto a rough start, but it's such an important thing to acknowledge. And we hope that in sharing some knowledge throughout this series, we can help people avoid the situation that you ended up in, Rhi, because, you know, silver linings, I absolutely hate that phrase, but there will be things that you learn from this experience with him that he came to teach you. However heartbreakingly painful those lessons are or will forever be, he will have taught you so much that you will be able to, you know, take with you for the rest of your life. I wish that you hadn't had to learn that way. But, you know, I know that there have been conversations that we have had about the way that things went with him that have shaped the way that you are with Harley and the things that you're doing differently. And I think maybe that's a good question to ask. Like, what have you learned? What can you take away from this absolutely devastatingly shit situation? Because otherwise, yeah, his life was not in vain.
No, you're so right. It's changed my perspective on a few things. I think I am a slightly different owner now. I mean, I still have all the compassion and all the things that he had for me, but I think I was so open in that and a bit different now. But I think one of the things around Harley's management is I am like so meticulous about certain things. Like, I won't trot on the road unless I literally have to get out of the way of a car. Like, I just won't do it. Or he's so fresh and so spooky that it's dangerous not to, which, you know, has hardly ever happened ever. Because when you spend so much time with a horse who has so many issues in their feet, and you see the MRIs and you see the x-rays and you get to know all the hoof structure, then you do start realising how delicate they are and how they hold their bodies in the 23 hours a day that they're not with you is as important. And it's why Barefoot is still very much at the forefront of my mind and something I want to do when I'm a bit more established with him. And I know some people will be like, oh, just do it now, just take the shoes off. But for me, like, it's complicated, not just because of where I am in my journey with him, but I'll hold my hands up and say, emotionally, it's very difficult for me to think about taking shoes off my horse, because the idea of a foot problem arising, which I appreciate is backwards thinking, because if a foot problem is there, obviously you take the shoes off, and the foot problem was there anyway. But it's just a bit of a weird wired loop.
Very tied up in a lot of things for you, and I completely understand that. And also, I think one of the biggest things is, if you were on my yard, you wouldn't feel the same, because every single one of the horses on my yard is barefoot, whereas every single one of the horses on your yard wears shoes. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but context is important, because if you know, I take horses' shoes off, not personally, Farah does it, but I take horses' shoes off all the time, and I see it as a huge part of healing their body. And we spoke about this with Woody, and I had spoken to you about it and said, you know, and this is where the hope comes in, guys, because, you know, potentially if early on in your process with him, you had removed the shoes, used boots and pads to support him, maybe had him in a setup where he was out in a very small sand pen initially, something like that, you know, that would have allowed movement or track livery or something a bit less, standardized, because and that's what we want to talk about standardized 100%. And box rest and that kind of thing. Because I think the way the horse lands on the earth is so important for the way that our entire body feels. So when we add a steel shoe in the way, what we are doing is breaking that cycle. And I'm not purist, okay, guys, and I'm not going to come and bash people about having shoes on their horses, but I really have seen the difference. I see it, and I've seen it so many times over. We have a horse with us at the moment. Her name is Willow, and she's a big mare. She was really, really stuck. Everything about her was stuck. She could hardly move. Like, literally, like, you'd ask her to move her body in the arena and she was like, she was glued into the ground. And when she walked down a hill, she would like slap the earth with her feet, right? She would just walk around like hitting the ground really hard. I'm about to be just interrupted by my dogs. George just lets them in because he has no idea that I'm recording a podcast. So she would like hit the earth really hard, and she had all four shoes on, and her hind feet, her conformation is not good. She has actually got like slightly not cow hocks, the opposite. Like, she wouldn't do any good trying to catch a pig in a corridor, or whatever the phrase is, you know, because the pig would run straight through her legs. I've made it up. I don't think it's real. But basically, if somebody's got bow legs, they wouldn't catch a pig, because if the pig was running
right.
like between their legs.
Understood.
But that meant that she puts a lot of force down the outside of her hocks and the outside of her feet. And when she walked up a hill in her shoes, she would walk completely on her toes, because she physically couldn't flex her foot accordingly to land flat on the earth. We took her shoes off. I believed that she had good hoof quality. We took the shoes off. Her feet now land completely flat on the ground. She is much sounder. We have been able to, she's now schooling nicely, hacking very happily. She's a very, very different horse. And I believe that part of that journey, along with other things, has been her reconnecting with the ground. And the way that she walks now, you know, like, she touches the ground. She's not like, yeah, here I am. She's like, oh, here I am. And it's that kind of connective delicateness that I think they regain when they no longer wear shoes.
No, I agree. And as you said, I would have, if I were in the same position again, and it's very easy to say this theoretically because none of the emotion is there in the same way, and hindsight, but I'd feel much more confident when when we talked with my vet and my farrier about putting pads on, I'd have just been like, no, let's take the shoes off first and do it that way. Because actually the pads in particular, I mean, yes, of course they were there to support his feet, they were there to support the injury, and I understand all of that, and no one knows exactly what would have happened, but it made it a million times harder trying to get to retirement. Absolutely. I think the other thing is it's really changed and it's uncomfortable to say this because I hope I'm never in that position again, because I don't know if I would be strong enough to do what I'm about to say, but my opinion on the length of time for box rest, and I'm sure that actually there would be people who listen to this, and I urge you to try and be kind, who would say that 9 months of box rest is atrocious and completely unethical, and I totally understand that. I think I also now am at the point where I would never ask a horse to do that for me again. And Woody was incredible in the sense that if you walked into the barn and said which horse has been on box rest for 6 months, you would never point at him. You just wouldn't. He was amazing, an amazing horse. But it is very difficult, you know, you're like, oh, we're 3 months in, we've just got to add another couple of months, you've just got to add another couple of months, and you're, you know, it doesn't fit. It's not like the vets come to you on day one and said, your horse is going to be in the box for the next 10 months, make a decision. It's not as simple as that. But having the strength and the courage to say, no, I'm not doing more than this, and I'm either going to turn them out and we're going to see, because I've also seen people, and I'm not suggest this is not advice, but I've seen people who have turned horses out who have injuries, and depending on the injury, giving them that time, that year, you know, grass is, what do they say? Grass is Dr. Green, that's it, Dr. Green. Turning them out for a year is an option. And the other option is, you know, it's not possible to do that, and therefore quality of life is the question, and therefore it's a case of box rest or letting that horse go. And those are impossible decisions to make. I mean, I didn't have the strength to do it.
No, and I think the problem is that you're just being given two options.
Yeah, speak more on that, because you don't see it as a black and white. Yeah.
No, I don't, because there are very different ways of mending things, and rehab is like a passion of mine, sadly has become one, because I have been unfortunate enough to meet many injuries with my own horses, but then also be gifted with other people's horses. And I always say this, I learn from every horse that comes through the barn doors at Equine, and I'm so grateful to every single one of them, no matter how complicated and peculiar some of them may be. Duchess. Lovely darling Duchess. But it's this grey area where we're given box rest or sack them off in a field. And the reality is, it is like sacking them off in a field in some instances. Like you're saying, it's one or the other. And I don't believe that is how it should be. And it's quite complicated to explain exactly what I would do in every instance, because it's so different for every horse. But for example, it depends as well on the circumstance. So if you had like something like a pedal bone fracture, let's use that as an example because that's really relevant. My take on it would be you would use, you know, restricted movement, but it wouldn't be no movement, because no movement means no blood supply. No blood supply means degradation of the tissue, degradation of the circulation, loss of muscle, loss of all of those things. And then you would start to see a bit the decline of things. And this is really important to understand, is horses are not designed to stand still ever. And if you saw horses in the wild, they wouldn't have the same sort of injuries that stable, you know, manufactured human kept horses would have, because their bodies just function in a different way. And that's something I see with barefoot horses, and that's something we'll touch on at the end with injury prevention. But their bodies don't function in the same way, so they wouldn't be dealing with the same kind of injuries. But for example, they might deal with this injury that I had an experience with, where Zora got kicked in the field. She had a splint bone fracture, and it was an open fracture, and it was complete. The splint bone is a bone, humans don't really have them, I don't think. I think if you had a shin splint, I think it might be the same thing, but horses have this infuriating bone that dangles off the outside of their cannon bone or on the inside of their cannon bone on their front legs. So if you ever see a horse with a splint, like a lump below the knee, that is because this bone fuses at a certain point to the cannon bone at the top on the front legs. This is why we don't trot on the roads, because it can form like a big lumpy thing, and that is due to too much concussive force. But also in the hind leg, it doesn't fuse all the way down. It fuses at the top, and then it doesn't fuse at the bottom. And so it's like this kind of slightly annoyingly dangly bit of bone. And Zora got kicked in that bone, and it was like a good small amount, a centimetre or two, was detached from the rest of the bone, right? My vet said, you need to put her on box rest. Now, I completely understand that. She had an open wound initially, right? Yes, hear you, good. So we put her on box rest, and the fracture did nothing, right? And she was like Woody. She was a very good girl. She just didn't mind. As far as I could tell, she wasn't bronking around her stable. She was very calm. We could hand graze her. She was really sensible. She was like, okay, 3 months. And I would, again, like you, I wouldn't do it again, because the fracture stayed in the exact same place. And what my vet said, and I'm very fortunate to have a very pragmatic vet. He's an older guy, and I've worked with him for a long, long time. He said, 2 things are going to happen here. You're going to start doing some work again, and she's going to find it uncomfortable, and we need to go and take the piece of bone out because it's going to jingle about in her leg and cause aggravation. Or it will stay there and nothing much will happen. Third option, it will reconnect itself at some point later down the line. I started doing some gentle walking. We started moving her body. The circulation started going again. And we x-rayed a month later, and it had stuck itself back together. And that is on circulation of the leg. And that was an injury caused by something external to her. A horse, unfortunately one of my own horses, ran up to her backwards and kicked her in the leg. She had boots on. It was just really bad luck. But her body fixed that. And this is what I think is so important when it comes to the conversation around prevention, is we have to help our horses' bodies help themselves as much as we possibly can. And that's why I think, your experience with Woody is so hard, because his body stopped being able to help itself. And it would have taken a huge shift and a very different life and potentially a long, long, long time for his body to get back to that. And it may not have. And you don't. We don't know.
I think that's the thing. I think with Woody, like, the fracture was horrendous. His way of holding his body was 10 years of wrong. The arthritis, like, when you look at him as an actual example, the likelihood of us being able to change the outcome was so slim. Like, it's very unlikely based on the injury. But it does give me hope as we learn more and more that, like, we can do that differently. And I think that's why I was so passionate that if I had a young horse, that I could do things a bit differently, because I kept thinking, it haunted me actually for ages and ages. Like, if I just had him when he was younger, I might have been able to change the outcome, because I could change how he holds his body. But, that aside, the one thing I did want to touch on, I just needed a little break from telling the story before I got to this, was, yes, it was a really bleak outcome, but I made a real joy of that year with Woody, and I did that through finding a new routine in the rehab. And rehab sucks. It sucks because, like, so much, you can't control anything. Like, you come up one night and the wind's howling and, your horse is, like, hanging on by a thread, and you have to do this 10 minutes of walking exactly, and they're not allowed to do anything, and then someone bangs a door and suddenly you're halfway across the yard. Or you come down on the weekend after a week of, more and more box rest, and people are out competing or going hacking, and it's awful. You just feel like a gremlin, like I did. I just get jealous, and you're just frustrated, and you're sad for your horse, and it's just awful. And the only way that I found to overcome that with my optimistic mindset was to make new fun, make new joys. And it was as small as, like, bringing a coffee down and, like, having a podcast while we hand graze that I enjoyed, or, like, I think I did a gin in a tin one day, which honestly, if you are rehabbing, you probably need alcohol anyway. So, and, like, I helped out at the local competition so that I could feel connected to it without being close to a competitor, which felt made me jealous, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And like there were ways that I made it quote unquote fun. And I groomed him every day, and I groomed him like twice a day. And that was a wonderful moment for us both, and I felt like I was giving something back to him. And like there are ways to make it nicer. Finding joy in a new routine. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, like falling in love with the process of it. And I've really good at this, because lucky me,
like gaslight yourself into loving it.
Yeah, literally. But it's interesting because like sometimes, and actually this is a phrase that I would like to get put on a t-shirt that they sold at the vets. We rarely find out what we want to know, but we always find out what we need to know.
Yeah.
And maybe it's what they need us to know from the vets. And being comfortable with that is like really, really hard, but really, really important, because often when we have injured horses, or we have horses with questionable pain, or performance issues, or whatever it might be that you're coming up against, there is a real fear of finding out the truth. And I think this was a little bit the case with Blondie and I. And I wanted to touch
about Blondie.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on our journey, because so Blondie is my big beautiful horse, and she is complicated, has PSSM, which means her muscles feel funny, and so it meant that they call it exercise intolerance, basically, where you have to be very careful how you manage them, how you feed them. We'll touch on this in another episode completely, because it's bloody complicated. But it meant that I always had in the back of my mind that was why she was exercise intolerant, and she always had struggled. We also have matching mugs, by the way. Shout out. Emma Bridgewater, do you want to sponsor us? I have a lovely one with, it's like a stable scene. Have you got that one? I love that one. That one looks like a farmhouse.
I have two. This is the Cotswolds, because obviously that's where I grew up, so my mum got me this. Love it. And then I have one that has my name on it, which is really cute.
I've got one that says Miri on the bottom, and it says "For a busy bee," and it's got bees all over it. And one of my lovely clients bought it for me because I've never stopped working. Back to Blondie. Slight side note there. This exercise intolerance I had always thought was because of her PSSM, because it kind of made her resistant and swishy and difficult, and also her hormones. We had wild hormone problems with Blondie, like permanently in season. She was like in season for like 3 weeks when I first got her. And then all of these things slowly started to level out, and the hormones started to be a bit more consistent. I fed her like a really high dose of a Premier Performance supplement, Sassy Mare, for a very long time, and that was actually really helpful. I don't know what I would have done without that supplement, because it actually gave her a cycle. Like, it meant her cycle was regular. It didn't mean that her cycle wasn't a problem for her, because every time she came into season, she would like stand still and pee and stand at the fence by the arena in a really, presenting herself kind of way. And it was obviously horrible for her. Like, she would have had PMDD, that horrible thing where people get dysmorphia and all that horrible stuff. Actually, this is a really relevant moment to add that thank you so much, Premier Performance, for sponsoring this episode. I have used their supplements a lot over the years, and there are so many of their supplements that have been so beneficial, including the Sassy Mare. So if you have got a mare that is struggling with her hormones, or you're coming into spring and you're a bit worried because last year it was a bit difficult, then that Sassy Mare supplement would definitely be something that I would be suggesting to try. We have a discount code. It is in the show notes. Going back to Blondie, all of these things tied into this horse being really complicated to manage, right? And I didn't really know what it was that was creating this exercise intolerance. We made nice progress in some times, and then other times she was very difficult again. So it was all very intermittent. I never really felt like I got going, and sometimes it was good and sometimes it was hard. Anyway, I got to the point where I said, right, she's very different to handle now. She trusts me very differently. I'm going to take her to the vets. And that was a really stressful thing to do, because she's not just difficult. She's like quite lethal with people she doesn't know. She broke someone's leg in one of her previous homes. And she's one of those horses where if she's soft and you know her and you respect her boundaries and you listen and you're like emotionally available, she's like, welcome, come in my stable. But if you're not, then she will tell you to get out and you need to get out right now. Otherwise she'll probably, she would kick you. There's no question. So I knew that taking her to the vet was going to be a difficult thing. And I spoke to the vets about it and I handled her myself, and they were aware that it was going to be maybe a difficult day, and they were really grateful actually to me for having explained that, because they were like, most people just drop a horse off like this and let people get on with it, and whereas I handled her, like I was the one that did the trotting up and the lunging and all of those things,
which is unusual because normally at the vets they don't let you do that, especially in certain rooms, like you just can't go in.
Exactly. Whereas I was actually quite involved, and they were really grateful to me for that. Like I helped them put her feet on the blocks for her x-rays and certain things, but there were times when I couldn't be there. And there was this guy, I can't remember his name, but he they go off and come back. They go to the stable, they come back, whatever. And he initially went off with Blondie, and then he came back and he had like a hard hat, like strapped to his belt. And I was like, it wasn't like a riding hat. It was like a motor, like a
builder's hat.
No, like a skateboard helmet.
Oh, what?
Yeah, because he was like, well, I don't ride, but I needed to have a hard hat for these kind of situations. So basically what they ended up being able to do when she was there was she was actually lame on the day that I took her. And she hadn't been lame. I've not been riding a lame horse. I'm not an evil person, or not knowingly anyway. But I think what it was she was bilaterally slightly unsound on both hind legs. And this is actually something that often is really hard to diagnose, because it can, the question is the horse that just the way the horse moves? On that day, she was lamer on one of her hind legs than the other, and she was pretty unsound. And I think it was some divine universal moment where she'd had a trim from the farrier, and for the first time ever, she'd been a bit footsore. And so because she was a bit footsore, she then showed up actually as lame behind. And also she'd had some sedation. And horses will do their very, very best to not show you that they're lame, because survival will do that to you. And anyway, nerve blocked, discovered that she was unsound in below the hock in her in one hind leg, right hind. And so we then scanned her suspensories, helmet on, definitely for that one apparently, and because she's very needle shy, so giving her sedation is very hard. So they had given her lots of sedation, but it was obviously she just had to keep having lots of it because she would really fight it, because she just was really stressed by the whole situation. And I know that the day was really stressful for her, but I know that it was also really necessary for her. And they nerve blocked. We scanned the suspensories, and she was diagnosed with something called proximal suspensory desmitis. I've talked about it a couple of times, but it's basically where the suspensories are put under unnecessary strain long term, and then they scar and they kind of become like fibrous and not very functioning. So the suspensory is kind of like the Achilles. So it's like the flexion system in the back of the leg. It's like it should be like really solid and powerful. And hers had been damaged. Now I think, believe that they had become damaged because of the balance of her hind feet for a long time. So again, going down the barefoot route, she'd not worn back shoes most of her life because nobody dared put shoes on her. But they also didn't dare trim her hind feet properly, because they probably would have had their life ended, because she was in a stressed state so much of the time because of all of the other things that she had going on. So we x-rayed her back feet and looked at the plantar angle, so the angle of her pedal bone. And some of the suggestions I were given was very clinical. Right. So I was only given two options. I was given the option of surgery, neurectomy, so she could have had the nerves taken out of her back legs. Now, I don't believe ethically that is really what I would ever want to do. It feels really funny territory. And with competitive horses, there has been talk about it not being legal. I actually don't know if it is legal.
I don't believe it is legal in show jump, British. You can't show jump if you've had.
And I think British dressage, I think it's complicated. We might need to look up this part. So, thanks to our research scientist, Rhi, we have just found out that, well, I think I knew this already, but British Dressage in 2023 put out a statement to say that horses with a neurectomy, denerving, are not legal to compete, because what you are essentially able to do is continue to ride a horse who is in pain, but they just can't feel that they are in pain. Now, for some horses...
Sorry, it was 2022, team. Sorry. Bad researcher. I thought it was 2023. It was actually 2022.
But what we're coming to understand is that you've got to change so much of the horse's body to relieve the suspensory of the strain, is basically what I learned. And so I was given that as an option, and I was given medication as an option. Now, for Blondie to have had medication, I was being told she would have to have general anaesthetic. She'd have to be put on the ground to be able to have injections into the area to create more comfort of the area. Now, Blondie didn't have any holes in her suspensories. There was just an ununified structure in the fibre. So every situation is different. I'm not here to tell you this is a hard and fast rule. But what I did do is I started doing some work with Lily Wilson, who is from Nurturing Nature Equine. And we haven't asked her yet, but we hope she's going to come on the podcast and talk about her take on rehab and rehabilitation and all of these things, so that we would go with an approach that was non-invasive. And there is another word for it, but it's escaping me right now. And it begins with a C, and it's really bothering me. But it means that we kept her going out in the field the whole time. We changed her foot balance. We've been doing loads of body work, and I began a protocol of starting to learn about her posture in her hind end. So I've talked about it a lot on my Instagram and on YouTube, actually, and I've got a whole video talking about the postural shift. But this is a big, big thing. And the way that we can handle things with horses can vary. It doesn't have to be that you just take the one track approach. And this is where holistic vets like Lily come in, because they give you this different way of looking at things, which changes the whole horse's whole system.
Yeah. I wondered too, Miri, if you could talk about what you do with your rehabs who do not find rehab easy, because Woody was amazing, very easy, but Blondie, I remember you telling me when she came back from the vets, she was so offended and upset with you for ages, and she is someone who's very black and white in how she feels and shows that. So how do you deal with horses who do find this stuff really challenging, when you have to keep doing the rehab, you can't stop, but you equally have a horse who's getting more and more upset or offended, I guess, with what you're asking? How do you do that?
So I think that it comes down to what is our goal, because that for me was what shifted the way that I worked with Blondie. Bear in mind, I got our diagnosis last year in March, May, I can't remember, one of the two, long time ago. I rode Blondie for the first time 2 weeks ago. And there wasn't an injury. I could have actually ridden her straight away in walk, to do her rehab. But I made the decision that I wanted to mend those parts of her that had been broken by having been in discomfort for a long period of time. So if you are in the position where you have a horse that is very difficult and you're having to do that rehab, what I would be doing is looking at what the rehab is aiming to do. And this is something I talk about a lot. What is the timeline, and what is the first goalpost? Because, and I think you and I spoke about this when you were going through such hard stuff with Woody, but my goal often with rehabilitating horses is, how can I help that horse be a horse again? Not be a ridden horse. They don't give two shits about whether they get ridden again, but what they do care about is that their quality of life starts to change, and they get the opportunity to go back in the field, to be with their friends, to be able to walk and be comfortable and move and all of those things. So that for me is where the priority lies. And if that means that then the timeline has to change, then that's really important. And I think that's a really important conversation to have with your vet, is if they say to you, this is your solution to becoming a ridden horse, you can say, how about if my goal was to just have a horse that's happy to be in the field initially, and then we will re-establish the ridden part at a later date. That is what my go-to is. And I think you know, the reality is, you know, if you have a very difficult situation, I had a horse with a broken shoulder come for training, not training, God, no, rehab. And he had to do controlled walking exercise, and he wasn't under my veterinary care. He was going to a different vet, but we were tasked with the job of just getting him safely through that rehabilitative portion. And he was difficult. He was 5 years old. He was unregulated. He had none of the training that any of my horses had. He had a bit of a pissy nature, I'd call it. He kind of looked at me a bit like, I don't really want you to help me because I'm a bit fed up. I've been on box rest for a long time, giving me the middle finger kind of feeling. So I had to very carefully navigate that. We used sedation. He had to have settling to start with.
I use that with Woody for turnouts and things. Yeah,
absolutely. And it is vital. Unfortunately, horses don't have very good self-preservation, and their call to movement is so strong that when they've had that period of box rest, it's like a no-brainer. Calming cookies are a wonderful thing, as we have discussed. They will not have a sedative effect, but they will help stop the adrenaline from spiking. So when you get to the point where then you're doing a little bit more, then they will help in that respect. And hand walking is a really hard thing with a horse because you're at the front and they're wild and they're on top of you. And if they don't have the training to understand about personal space and self-management and all of those things, then that can be really dangerous. So my suggestion actually is to long line. And that is what we did with this horse that came for training. Is we had somebody at the front, somebody at the back. The person at the front obviously always had a hat on because his go-to was to stand up and then do like a capriole. So he'd rear and then buck at you. But by being on the long lines, we managed completely to have no incident, no injury, no recurrence, and we could do that walk rehab that he needed. And then we were able to slowly integrate him into a pen and then small paddock turnout. And then he went back home and he is living his absolute best life, having a lovely time. So, you know, and that was a fracture. That was a difficult injury. That was a hard one. And, you know, box rest unfortunately does have its place in situations like that. But I don't know. I'd be interested to hear Lily's take on that when we get to talk to her about fractures because, movement
the
maybe
non-movement
can
part
help.
is hard. Yeah,
The non-movement
piece is hard. So I really want to get into some like hopeful messages as we get to the end of this podcast. Before we do that, I want to thank Toggy, who have also sponsored this podcast. I have worked with Toggy for a really long time now, and in fact, they started working with me during Woody's rehab as we were just coming back into ridden work, and you really won't see me riding anything else. I'm very much like a ride in all weathers type of person, and so I've really put their collection of rainwear to the test. And they recently released their gorgeous 2025 collection, which has this beautiful emerald and these dark khaki. Those are the two kind of main colours. And they have this hybrid gilet called the Leighton, which I have from a previous season's colours, and they've redone it in this gorgeous emerald, and it's just lovely. It's smart and it's flattering. It has these lovely gold accents. So if you're looking for a special piece of clothing for spring, you can use the code TEL, as in This Equestrian Life, 15 to get an exclusive discount. And I'm going to go off piste here, off script. Sorry, Liv, from Toggy. But I also just want to say, Toggy are some of the best humans I've ever worked with. And I'm not going to get emotional again because I've pulled it back in. But when I lost Woody, they were amazing. They were such wonderful partners. They were so good through all of the rehab. And I remember like they sent me some numbness when we thought we were going to get sort of back out riding a bit, and they just came at the wrong time, and they were so apologetic and amazing. And I remember saying,
when you got a new hat.
Yeah, and I was like, when I lost Woody, I sort of said to them, look, I don't know where I am with this anymore. I don't even know if I want to ride. I don't know if I want to post. I don't know if I want to ever touch a horse again. Like, it was really awful. I was like, do you want me to just like give my stuff back and da-da-da-da-da? And they were like, nope, we love you. And actually that summer, I spent the summer not doing horsey stuff really at all. And they still invited me to like choose a couple of pieces that I wanted. And they were like, we don't care. We just don't care whether you're riding or posting or whatever. We care about you as a human. And I just think, yes, these brands are great, but the people behind them are really important too. And I hope, Toggy, don't mind me saying that, but they are a really good set of humans as well.
And it's really good kit. I remember I haven't branched into toggy clothing for a very long time, but when I was a kid I had toggy jumpers and they were like my fave.
100%. They're
Yeah,
great.
they lasted forever. The two-tone.
Yeah, the rainwear in particular, the coats,
Oh really?
fantastic.
I should maybe invest. I've been struggling with a waterproof coat for about 10 years, so
I mean, you are out in like 10 hours of rain every day, Miri, so I don't know if there are many
not many
coats that could
coats.
do that. But
No, I think I need to fashion a tarpaulin into a coat. Maybe that would do it. Toggy, can you sort it out? Anyway, moving on.
So,
Let's talk
hope.
about positivity. After hope and positivity and kind humans, I think injury prevention is a really important thing to discuss in this moment because, yes, when the problem has occurred, we can absolutely talk about positive things. I've kind of already touched on that, but I think injury prevention is a really, really important element of this. And I think thinking about what horses need is really valuable for that. And the way that you keep Harley is very relevant to this because movement is such an important thing. Horses are designed to walk miles and miles and miles and miles and miles every day. And when we then constrict them, confine them, and then expect them to do exercise, if you imagine staying in one room all day that was as small as a horse's stable is, you think a stable, even if it's 14 foot by 14 foot and a horse is 6 foot long, there's not a lot of motivation to move around that stable. They're going to stand in one place. And then you say, right, now you're going to do some exercise. You would feel like shit. It's kind of like going and sitting in a cupboard in your house or your utility room or your bathroom, somewhere small, and then you're doing everything that you've got to do in the day. It's mad to think that, actually. It's quite a good analogy for stable-kept horses, right? And there was something I saw the other day that said, stop saying your horse gets 4 hours of turnout and start saying that your horse spends 20 hours in the stable. Yeah. And I was like, Jesus, yeah. Because of the winter, it's harder. The horses are in more. But that movement piece is so important. And I think that's changed the way that you keep Harley, or not changed the way you keep him, but you have sustained that way because of how he was kept before, right? And you touched on that in our last podcast, I think.
Yeah, so Harley lives out overnight all year round, which I know very, very lucky to be able to do that. It means he's out for 16 hours a day, plus the hour that I ride him, although I don't ride him every day. And that's lovely. And I hold that I really try and keep that because I think it's so good, especially for a younger horse and one that is so big and he's growing all the time. I think it's really good for him to move as much as possible. But even beyond that, like I just think there are simple things you can do, even if your horses are out during the day. Like Harley gets a little massage before I get on him. I warm up really gently. I'm not asking him. Like Harley and I have about 10 or 15 minutes in every session now, which I didn't used to do to this extent, where we just like walk on a loose rein, then we trot on a loose rein, canter on a loose rein. Like I don't ask too much too soon. I'm very careful about how I warm him down. I don't, I mean, again, I'm quite anal about this, but I don't canter him through like thick mud. I don't push him on really boggy ground. Like I'm quite protective over his movement.
But you're saying those things like they aren't standard, and I think
well, I don't think they are, to be fair. Yeah,
you're so aware, and I'm very aware too. My God, I've had horses with lots of injuries, check ligament injuries, and again, we've we've got loads we can talk about on this. So we'll go on to things in other episodes about actual like what to do when you get an injury, maybe. But yeah, all of those things you just said, they just sound like such common sense, and I hope that if you're listening to this and it doesn't feel like common sense, that maybe it becomes a bit, because if we can help you prevent a problem, then I would love to be the person to do that.
I think you're constantly fighting a horse's, not fighting, but fighting a horse's, what's the word, potential nature. To compensate. What were you going to say? Compensation, yeah.
I said nature.
Oh no, yeah. They're because when we ride them, obviously there's often compensation patterns that occur, and those compensation patterns can lead to injury, which can then lead to horrible periods of rehab. But I think that
goes back to the point of like horses just want to survive, so they will if they feel soreness somewhere. What we're saying is they will just compensate to make themselves look sound, but they're actually just putting extra strain in a certain place, like Blondie with her suspensories. That was the place that took the brunt of the compensation.
Yes. which is why he gets physio every 3 months. I get the saddler out every 3 to 6 months, depending on when she wants to come. He gets the dentist. I spend a lot of time in the gym working on my own symmetry and my balance. We have lessons. Like, I enjoy all of this stuff too, and I appreciate that there's a financial element to all of this. But it is really, I do think it's important, because compensation for Woody ended up changing the entire way that he held his body, which ended up changing the forces that went through his legs and his feet, which ended up leading to the pedal bone fracture. You know? And that's an extreme version, but it is what it is.
But you were just an everyday horse rider. You weren't eventing at a high level. It didn't happen when he jumped down a big drop. It happened when he was just in the field, because his body had started that pattern of dysfunction very early on. And unfortunately, you were the one that bore the brunt of that, the responsibility of that as such.
So there's the injury prevention, but there's also, I want to kind of give hope after losing a horse piece, because I know there are people here who this will feel very raw for. And like I said, I found the first couple of months and more very, very difficult. And at the time, my partner sort of sat me down and was like, you know, I really think you'd benefit from trying to find something else to fill your time, because if you have had a horse and you are down in the morning and the evening and sometimes more because of rehab, suddenly having all those hours free is quite stressful and quite difficult, especially if you're grieving. And I started swimming, and I so recommend swimming for people who are struggling, because when you're in a pool, all you can do is think about breathing. You can't hear anything else, you can't see anything else. You have to breathe to survive, and therefore it is a little bit like the feeling you get when you put your foot in the stirrup and you can just, the world disappears. Swimming is great. I then went on to I found a new gym, and I worked a bit with a PT, and that was just so helpful for my mental health. And I found other hobbies, and I guess what I'm saying is, like, I promise it gets better. Like, the pain doesn't go away, but it changes, and it gets easier. And when people say, I have messages all the time about people being like, I just don't know if it's the right decision, I don't know what to do, and people always said to me, you'll know when you know. And it's so true. There will come a point, or there will be a moment where you're like, I'm doing this for them as opposed to something for myself. And having that is very comforting, even years on. And, you know, look, I guess not look at me now, but like 9 months on, I found this lovely 5-year-old, and for the first few months I was trying to, I sort of convinced myself that I wasn't going to love them. I was like, no, because I don't want to feel like that again. They're just going to be a horse. And of course that never happens.
I remember you saying that you were actually scared to love him.
Yeah, I didn't spend time with him on his days off, because I was afraid that if I groomed him and cuddled him, that I would like love him like I loved Woody, and that was very hard. And you sort of learn, and you are reminded that your heart is big enough for more. That it's not constricted, and that you can still love that horse, and they can still be the biggest part of you, and you can still have room for another, and you don't have to berate yourself and kind of not love again.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think grief is such a complicated thing, and I think I saw a really lovely analogy that I think I sent to you when it was so raw for you. That grief is like having a balloon in a box, and when it first happens, the box is the same size as the balloon, so the balloon is permanently touching the sides, and the sides are when you feel it, right? And then as we you know, carry on with our lives as we do, it's not that the balloon becomes smaller, but the box becomes bigger. And there'll be times like today when the balloon bumps against the side and you feel that absolute pain like it was yesterday, because the balloon has not grown smaller, the box has only grown bigger. But the box grows bigger, and then you get this love inside, and we're both crying. And often, you know, I think grief is just a reminder of the love that you had in the first place, and it's such a privilege to have that grief.
And
in some
if
ways.
you know someone who has lost a horse or a person, Miri got me the most wonderful gift when I lost Woody, and it really touched me because it was so incredibly thoughtful. In my garden that I'm looking at right now, there is a plant, and it's a blossom tree, and Miri got me this blossom tree, and she said, I got you this because every year around the anniversary it will bloom. And I don't want to cry again, but it was so comforting the first year after. it was coming up and I was feeling really sad and down. And then I remember looking into my garden every day and I started looking out for the blossom. And then it bloomed in March and it was like so wonderful. And I just remember what you said and I just thought, Jesus Christ, what a wonderful gift to give someone. Anyway, there you go. We said it would be hopeful and it sort of is, but
yeah,
sorry,
but also,
everyone.
I think the hard thing is in this responsibility that we take with these horses, and in so much the joy that they give us, there's this responsibility and this depth to that is so complex, and it's becoming okay with that is so important when we have horses. And, you know, unfortunately, you won't become okay with it straight away. And I have had a couple of horses that have come to the end of their life now. And my old mare, Nanette, she was 27 and she had colic, and the decision was very easily taken from me in some ways. And then we had another older horse who came to us with an injury, and we had to make that difficult decision for him. But I don't think I will ever become okay with making that decision, but it is accepting that it is part of what we deal with. And this podcast kind of taken a bit of a morbid turn, I suppose, and it wasn't really intended as that. And I feel like we need to really spin this back.
Well, we will. I think the spin back is that happens, but even, you know, the conversation we have coming up with Lily Wilson, every time that I go online now and I see new research papers, I see groups growing on Facebook around Barefoot, I see people discussing new ways, different ways, I see track livery and the things that they can do for some horses, like it does
no hope completely, everybody's given up. Those track livery places are unbelievable.
It does feel like a very hopeful time. Like, despite all of what we've spoken about today, I really feel like even from 2 years ago when this was happening with me, we are in a different place, and our community and our industry is getting better and better all the time. And I know people feel very Marmite about AI, but even AI's impact on technology is like moving at the speed of light, and our ability to help our horses in different ways is becoming, it does give me a lot of hope, actually, without sounding flippant.
I agree. And I feel very hopeful now about the way to help horses, because I have experience now helping so many horses who were seemingly, you know, no hope, not gonna go anywhere. And, you know, you want your time again, don't you? You ever feel like you want to be able to, I think to myself a lot of the time, if I'd have known this then, how would I have helped that horse? Or, you know, what would I have done differently? And maybe this is our opportunity to help those horses, Rhi, because you and I are getting to have this conversation in front of this wonderful community of people where we can say there is hope. If you are in a situation where you are being given not very much hope by your vet, please ask another vet. Not every vet has every answer. They may not have experienced that. And sometimes vets can be very knowledgeable in one sphere and not very knowledgeable in another, or their experience of that particular thing has been not very positive, so then they don't have a very positive outlook on it, whereas someone else would be like, no, I've helped loads of horses in this way. I'm very fortunate to have great vets at Newmarket Rossdales, and they would be a place where I would really recommend for some hope, because they will, you know, I have been there lots of times with lots of different horses, and there's a real optimism, and they're very forward thinking, and there's a lot of modern technology and, you know, thinking outside the box, and, you know, we can try this or we can try that. And I think, there is hope, and there is a possibility for change and shift, and it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. And if you don't feel like the answer that you have been given is the right one, because there's something in your gut or your core or your heart that just feels like, I'm not sure, you are allowed to challenge that. Your horse is your responsibility. Whether you are a new horse owner, you can reach out to somebody, you can get a second opinion, you can ask your vet and say, you know, I think I'd want to get a second opinion on this. They might be a bit upset some of the time, but you don't need to protect their ego. You're protecting your horse. And there is ways of doing things now, and like we said about the injury prevention, you know, keeping your horse in the most natural way possible is the best way that you can prevent injury. Keep them moving, keep their gut healthy, keep their feet healthy. That is, I think, probably up there on the top of the list of what I would say for me is the best form of injury prevention you can manage.
And they're like tiny little decisions. Like, I don't give Harley hay nets, and I ask the yard not to give him hay nets because I don't want him pulling on the hay nets. It's such a simple thing, and they do it. I mean, again, some yards might be a bit annoyed by that, but that's not your problem. As long as the horse doesn't get it everywhere. And there are other things now you can do, like hay bars, and he gets a gut supplement. Like, it's small things.
Yeah, and it's all of those small things that make that big difference. You know, we spoke about last week in our podcast about the first year, you know, and we said briefly in that, you can do this, make these changes at any time. It doesn't have to be when you first buy a horse. And this is true. Your horse doesn't have to be injured to be benefited from the things that we've discussed. And there's so many resources out there, barefoot horses, nutritional advice, all of these different things. These are the kind of places where you can start to educate yourself and start to understand and see the patterns of what your horse is doing and how you might be able to help differently.
Yeah. Well, I hope that was okay. A bit of a heavier episode, and I hope that, you know, it had the right balance for you. We're coming to the end of season 1. We've got a few episodes left, and in the episodes coming up, we've got competitions and rider fitness and the 4 seasons of horse care as well. So lighter topics, a little bit easier. This was a heavy one, but we felt like it was important, and we're excited to bring you a really hopeful look to the future of rehab in season 2. But yeah, thanks for sticking with us. It's been a good one. I feel very comfortable with the vulnerability in our little group. So
and I think it's important to share that vulnerability. Like, you know, like we said, so often these things aren't discussed, and I think it's an opportunity for us to be open and human about it and be a place of support. As always, we are here if you would like to reach out to us. We haven't got a question or a comment to read out this week, but we did want to just read out one of the reviews that we've got, because I think that it was such a really lovely moment for us to acknowledge that this is the space that we have created. This lovely, gentle podcast is funny and informative and feels like I'm having a cup of tea with friends. And we reacted quite strongly to that, didn't we?
Gentle, felt bang on, cup of tea with friends. That's exactly how it should feel. We are literally drinking tea, trying not to slurp next to the microphone, so
yeah, absolutely. On that note, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next time. Goodbye for now.
See you next week.